The captain is dead. When we first started today, the 7 of us were thoroughly creeped out, terrified of what might lie in wait for us as we awoke in our cabins. Me, especially after hearing the music, voices and screaming filtering in from down the hall in a very lounge we'd slept in for the last 2 nights.
But I never imagined that when the day would end, there would be 2 less of us. 3, technically. And as hard as it may be to concentrate on anything but that horrible fact, I'll try and get to what you guys have said and commented. To say, I appreciate everything you've suggested. To say, all of us are thankful would be a massive understatement. I feel like you guys are what's helping me cling to the last vestiges of sanity remaining in my mind. To the people who have commented about making it to either the engine room or the bridge to try and stop sabotage or even change the course of the ship. That was the very idea that the captain had came to us with when we got in. But as I'll explain in a minute, it seems I don't know what to call them, ghosts, entities, evil spirits, hell, for all I know, anticipated the move on our parts. Salt was one of the few ingredients we didn't seem to find in the veranda grill. Though from what the map of the ship shows, there are numerous more restaurants on board. So we're gonna keep our eyes open for it. I just hope you'll be right about these things being unable to cross it. To the person who mentioned the Morse code transmitter, I'd forgotten to mention last night that it had been torn out along with the radio microphone. These things very much do not want us trying to call for help. We're most definitely not splitting up anymore either. And knowing what we do now, it's just too dangerous, even if it means more slower going. But I should get on and tell what happened. The 4 of us were woken up by several rapid bangs on our cabin door after seeing the program, which had been shoved under the door last night. I was only able to catch small spurts of sleep, ones that were all interlaced with horrendous nightmares of dozens, hundreds, thousands of the specters outside pressing up against our cabin, asking us to open the door and inviting us to the party down the hall, before bursting into laughter and screams. So when the knocking began, I shot up from where I'd been curled up on the room's left seat, my clouded, half asleep mind filling with panic and terror.
They're here. They're here for us.
However, the voice on the other side of the door filled us with a momentary sense of calm. It was the captain's voice. But remembering what had happened with the walkie-talkie yesterday, Wyatt shushed us and crept to the door, putting his eye against the peephole. He stood there for a moment, then pulled away, a look of relief in his eyes. It really is him, he breathed out before unlocking the door. Instantly, the captain strode in, followed close behind my wing. For a moment, the relief returned, until I realized that they were alone. He answered my unasked question before I was able to open my mouth. Will's gone. He put a hand over his face, taking a deep breath before continuing. I don't know how he managed to slip out without waking me, but when Vinny woke up a few minutes ago to use the bathroom, he found our cabin door unlocked and standing open. There's no sign of him anywhere.
The man's words hung in the tension and dread-filled air. Every single one of us knew exactly where he'd gone. He's gone off to find that woman again.
Diana, finally, the silence was broken by Andrew. So, what do we do? A pained look crossed the captain's face. I'm on a sick torn, boys. Part of me thinks we should immediately try finding him if it's already too late, but another part thinks we should try and find any way to either stop the ship or sabotage the engines. He looked over at me. Nate, have you checked the computer to see what those people said? I shook my head and began to turn to boot up the laptop when I caught sight of the program lying on the floor. I knew if I showed it to them, the already palpable fear infecting our group would grow. But at this point, hiding anything might end up being a fatal mistake. They need to see it. I cleared my throat. Sir, before I do that, there's something that you all need to see. I picked up the program and handed it to the captain. Everyone crowded around as he flicked it open. I saw the men's faces turn pale as they read the notice inside, saw their own names written there. Andrew let out a shaky breath. Oh, okay, I think I'm starting to turn into a believer of the whole ghost ship idea, he said quietly. After that, we quickly broke out the laptop and checked her comments. After reading them for a few moments, I pointed, smiling slightly. Cap, looks like they have the same idea you do about either taking control of the ship or straight up sabotaging the engines. The captain stared for another second at the screen before nodding. Then that settles it. We head first back for the bridge, and if that doesn't work, the engine room, he gazed seriously around at all of us. From now on, we don't split up from each other at all. It'll mean things will be done slower, but in my personal opinion, it just might be safer. He shot a glance back at the open door to our cabin, especially with Will being who knows where on board. And putting away the laptop, I quickly took a moment to set the solar charger on the lip of the porthole to gather the charge. The laptop's battery had gotten precariously low, and the six of us moved out in the hall, closing the door behind us. We now carried, 3 fire axes we'd taken from red emergency boxes scattered around the ship. My head swung on a swivel as we passed each T-junction, half expecting something, or now someone, to lunge at us from around a corner. The silence only broken by the low throbbing sound of the ship's engines rising from far below us. Didn't help the tense atmosphere that had fallen over us. I didn't know if I was more afraid of running into the ship's inhabitants again, or our own colleague. When we reached the doors to the lounge, however, all thoughts evaporated in my head as we froze, staring into the room. It still looked the same as it had yesterday, with 2 large exceptions. The first is that the raised section of floor near the back of the room, where a band would play, one that was desolate and empty when we arrived, no longer was. Even from across the room, I saw instruments set up on it, violins, trumpets, bass, a drum set, and more were set up as though they'd just been put down by a band. Realization flashed through my mind. The music I heard last night, it wasn't a hallucination, it was real. The second noticeable change in the room was the clear after remnants of a party. Confetti and balloons, which had lost the helium needed to keep them afloat, littered the dance floor. And on a few tables, we could see half-empty wine and cocktail glasses. They had themselves one hell of a shindig last night, Vinny said softly. I shot a glance at him, but the look on his face mirrored the emotions I felt. In any other situation, the scene would have been one to feel happy about. People celebrating something. Here and now, though, it evoked the sort of dread and fear that one would get stepping into a haunted house. The captain shook his head slowly, then gestured to us. Come on, let's keep moving. Moving quickly, we crossed the lounge, kicking balloons out of our way before heading to the bridge.
Spencer exclaimed as we stood in front of the hatch, which led to the bridge area of the ship.
Which yesterday had stood wide open, held in place by the metal hook, which had been set into an eye swivel on the wall. But now, as we stared in disbelief, it had been tightly shut. Not just shut, but locked. Try as hard as we might, to the point our hands turned red and stung from exertion, the handle refused to spin. You gotta be fucking kidding me. Andrew muttered as the captain began patting at his pockets. His head snapped up, his eyes wide, as he realized something. The keys are gone, he said, before shaking his head. Will must have lifted them from me before he snuck out. The realization that we'd been effectively blocked from reaching the helm caused the hopeless feeling we had yesterday. Seeing the ship moving to return, I let out a sigh and put my back to the hatch, resting my head on the cool metal. After a minute, we slowly made our way down to the bowels of the ship. I already knew full well what we'd find, but we still followed the increasingly hunched shoulders of the captain down the narrow graded steps, flicking on our flashlights as the incandescent bulbs over our heads became fewer and farther between. So when we reached the hold and rounded the final corner, I saw what I expected. Okay. And the patch above which the words engine in boiler rooms were stamped was closed. Wyatt suddenly burst into a sprint, pushing past the captain to the door, where he frantically, almost hysterically began yanking on the handle. It was as if he hoped he'd be able to wrench it open by sheer will. Then it remained steadfast. Finally, he stopped to begin kicking the door. "Fuck you, you stupid piece of shit," he screamed, his voice bouncing off the grated floor and pipes echoing away into the gloom. "And fuck all of you long dead, ancient, last century ass ghosts." He collapsed to the floor, beginning to cry softly. I couldn't do anything but watch, stunned by the man's apparent mental break. Andrew, the captain, and Spencer moved to comfort him, leaving me and Vinny standing in the hallway. I shot a look to my left, seeing another closed and likely locked hatch. The sign above this door declared it the auxiliary machine room. Sighing, I placed my head in my hands. They knew we would try this. They knew, and they got ahead to cut us off, likely with Will's help. Now, and I was just trying to calm myself when the sound, one that was almost so quiet, I missed, it reached my ears.
Nathan.
Yes.
I froze in place, a massive shiver racing up my spine at the call. It was replaced by a steady stream of chills as my eyes widened behind my fingers. For a moment I waited, barely breathing as I strained my ears to hear. My heart was doing the Macarena inside my chest. All I could hear was the soft hissing of the pipes that ran alongside us and over our heads in the ceiling, along with the soft voices of the men ahead of me. I forced myself to let out a deep breath, trying to relax. "You're hearing things, buddy. It's just the pipes, nothing more. They're not down here with you." I was just beginning to believe it when it came again, and this time it was unmistakable. And
Nathan.
it was the man's voice I heard on the radio on the second bay aboard, the one I heard through the radio. It called out to me in a mocking, sing-song manner, and without seeing anything, I knew the owner of the voice was smiling. And not a pleasant smile either. I slowly stood up straight, pulling my hands away from my eyes
as my breath became ragged and shallow. And then, just when I thought it was impossible to feel any more frightened, the feeling of being watched came again, now from directly off to my right. Another chill shot through me as I realized where I was standing. I was standing almost directly in the middle of a T-junction. Swallowing hard, I slowly turned, aiming my flashlight with a shaking hand down the hallway. I almost screamed. The shadowy figures were back.
They stood at the end of the hallway, underneath the sign labeled water softener and air conditioning plant.
I couldn't tell how many there were, but they packed the hall from one side to the other, standing just out of reach of my flashlight's beam. I needed horror and dread filled every crevice of my body, and I felt myself begin to shake. I attempted to speak, and my voice seemed to catch in my throat. And then they took a step forward. The horror I felt increased as I saw the overhead lamp wink out, plunging the next section into darkness. I found my voice struggling to pass the single word over my lips. Fuck. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Vinny turn and look at me. The slight curiosity on his face immediately melted as he caught sight of the expression I wore. Nate, what the hell's wrong? He asked. Faintly, I heard the others stop talking, as well as them slowly begin to make their way back to me. I kept trying to force more words out. I have to warn them. My mind screamed at me that it was as though I lost my grasp of the English language. It felt Vinny step next to me and saw his flashlight aim down the corridor. And then I felt him go stiff as a board as he caught sight of what I'd seen. Oh, shit, he breathed. Then a little louder, guys. By now, the rest of our group had reached us, and everyone collectively aimed their lights down the hall. I heard Wyatt suddenly begin to hyperventilate as the figures took another step forward. Another overhead light went out. The captain, Jeezy's, the captain whispered. Spencer said nothing, but I knew he had to be scared. Shitless. Finally face to face with what he'd denied about, until now. As the third light went out, I finally found my voice again. Gabe? I felt the captain put a hand on my shoulder. What is it, Nate? I swallowed hard, then spoke the words I knew in the marrow of my bones to be true. I think it's time to start running now. The next moment, all of us were turning and sprinting back the way we come. Behind us, I more felt than heard our pursuers give chase, and I heard a noise that chilled me to the bone. The sound of the overhead lights just behind us, not just flicking off but shattering in their housings. The metal halls rang out with their screams and shouts as we urged each other to move faster, reaching the stairs and beginning to climb. Move your asses, everyone. The captain shouted as we dragged Wyatt off the top of the stairs. As we climbed, my eyes flashed to the metal signs indicating what deck we were on. We passed G deck, then F deck, making our way up. As we reached the top of the landing, I spared a look down. And this time, I did scream. The figures were swirling up after us. Some didn't even touch the floor, flying through the air in pursuit. I heard the whispers, laughter, and screaming I'd heard when I'd been quartered by the gym. This time, however, the voices somehow held even more malevolence than they had originally. They're angry. They're downright pissed that we just tried to sabotage the ship. I raced to keep up with the group. We'd just reached Ida, and a loud, clanging sound came from above us. I reached the bottom of the next set of stairs, where the others had gathered and looked up, and I almost screamed again, More shadowy figures were swirling down from above towards us. We were trapped in a pincer movement with no way to escape. For a moment, the existential dread I felt facing the rogue wave that night came again, and I felt sure this was the end of us all. Until Spencer let out a cry. Look, there. Spinning around, I saw a closed hatch standing a few feet away from us. The sign above it read cargo motor car hold. I was the closest to it and leapt for it, my hands locking around the handle and praying that it wouldn't be locked. To my relief, though, the handle spun and the hatch swung open. Come on, I yelled, moving out of the way to let the others in. As soon as the captain dragged Wyatt through, I slammed the hatch closed as I heard the man's voice ring out again. You're only delaying the inevitable, gentlemen. I felt someone slam into the hatch next to me, turning to see Vinny begin locking the hatch. Reaching up, I did the same on my side. Not a moment too soon either. As soon as the last lock had been flipped into place, something slammed into the hatch with the force of a speeding freight train. The two of us leapt back as the banging continued for a few seconds. Then, abruptly, it stopped. An eerie, unsettling silence fell over the hold, and after fighting to get my breath back, I turned to look into the room. Crates and other large boxes rose high around us, seeming to go on forever. Directly ahead, my light glinted off something powder blue. Focusing my light, I saw it had found what looked like an old mid-50s Cadillac convertible. The top was down, and I saw a matching blue leather interior, accented with white stitching. For a moment, everyone fought to find their breath, then the captain spoke. Okay, boys, we need to find a way out of this hole and back up to the upper decks. Try and find another exit. There has to be one. And then try to stay as close to each other as we could. We began to move across the huge hole to find it. And I stopped as I reached the Cadillac, reaching out and putting a hand on the quarter panel. The cool metal felt nice against my sweaty hand, and I was suddenly overcome with the feeling that I was about to collapse. My legs felt like jelly under me. So I need to sit for a minute. Sliding down, I put my back against the car and slid to the floor, putting my head in my hands. I felt myself begin to shake as the image of the figures chasing us replayed in my mind. Get a hold of yourself, Nate. You're okay. You're okay. Just keep it together. I whispered. Suddenly, a voice came from nearby. Dude, you okay? It was Vinny. Not wanting him to see my fragile mental state, I chose to keep my head in my hands and nodded. Yeah, I just needed a moment to collect myself. After that, I mumbled through my fingers, and Vinny replied after a moment, I get that, but you shouldn't split up from us. It's not safe. You know that by now. I sighed. He was right. I know, man. I began before letting out a shaky breath. I honestly don't know if we're gonna get off this ship alive, and that scares me. Speaking the truth felt like a massive weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I felt the car rock slightly, indicating he leaned against it. He let out a deep breath. Honestly, mate, I've had the same thought for a moment. The man's words comforted me, knowing someone else felt the same. Then he continued, but I mean, maybe it won't be so bad. And reach over me. I mean, come on, eternity on board a classy ocean liner, surrounded by people who just want others to join them. It can't be all that bad, right? You get to party forever after all. He let out a snort of laughter, but it hadn't sounded like the way I knew Vinny laughed.
His laugh was a deep, booming laugh. This one had been short and nasally.
Another chuckle came. The realization suddenly flashed through me as I remembered the radio call yesterday. A fresh dose of fear coursed through my veins as I slowly pulled my hands away from the head, suddenly feeling extremely vulnerable and realizing just how stupid I'd been, but there was nobody there. I mean, after all, it is inevitable. The voice came from directly over my head. It began to violently shake, beginning to hyperventilate, as I heard all pretext of my crewmate's voice melt away. And I was terrified to look up, but I couldn't help myself. Slowly, and feeling as though I were about to die of a heart attack, at any moment, I craned my neck to look above me. A pair of eyes stared down at me, peeking over the side of the Cadillac's hood. Ones that held both amusement and malevolence to them. The next few moments are nothing but a blur to me. The only thing I can remember is hearing my own shrill screams. That and Blaney running away as I heard the confused, terrified shouts of the others as they attempted to chase after me. I didn't even become cognizant of anything until I found myself in an unfamiliar foyer. Snapping back to reality, I looked around. I can hear the others' voices filtering up from below, calling out my name. What the fuck just happened? Swallowing, I turned and looked over the railing. I could see the flashlights wildly aiming around. I swallowed and yelled. Here. I'm here. A light flashed up, hitting me in the face and momentarily blinding me. I found him, I heard the captain's voice call. Nathan, stay right where you are. We're coming up. All right. I called back down, then took a step back, aiming my light to see where I was. My light flashed off the sign, which declared I'd somehow dashed all the way up to C deck. 3 decks? Then the image of the eyes staring down at me swam forward in my mind. I began to shake again, hearing the thing's voice imitating Vinny echo inside my head. Trying to calm myself, I took a few steps into the middle of the foyer, aiming my light around. It reflected off another sign, one that stuck out from the wall. Sound like the ground of the single halls.
Beneath it were a set of double doors, which stood open, the light inside spilling out into.
I couldn't see much inside, so I took a few more steps until I could see clearly. I blinked a few times. Am I seeing things? I wasn't. The swimming pool was packed. I saw people in old-style bathing suits swimming in the pool. A woman wearing a bathing cap swam by heading left, doing the butterfly stroke. The happy cry of children laughing could be heard, and 2 suddenly flashed by the doorway as they chased one another. I realized music filtered out from the room as well. Old swing music, which was playing from an intercom inside. None of that was what caused me to gasp. It was who I saw standing across on the other side of the pool. I struggled to find my voice before calling out. Will? At my call, he turned to look at me. The huge grin spread across his face. He raised an arm to wave at me. He looked nothing less than like the happiest man on the planet. And he wasn't alone. A second pair of eyes that turned to regard me at my call. A pair of blue, almost sapphire eyes, ones that for a moment made me feel as though I were falling under some kind of spell. Platinum blonde, hair bobbed around the shoulders and voluptuous lips pulled back into a smile, one that held equal amounts of warmth
and eeriness to them. She wore a light turtleneck and slacks that accentuated her figure, and a bracelet dangled from one wrist. The lips contorted into a smirk as she snaked an arm around Will's shoulders, and one eye closed in a wink. I'd never seen the woman before, but instantly I knew who she was. Diana. Then the doors to the pool slammed shut on their own. Will! I screamed, sprinting for the doors as I heard the others reach the landing. I heard them call out to me, but I was ramming my shoulder into the doors, trying desperately to get them to open.
What's happening?
I heard the captain cry out.
Will, he's in there, I screamed.
Instantly, the others joined me in pushing. After a moment, the doors suddenly swung inwards, almost sending us into the pool. I froze, feeling a wave of shock flash through me. The pool was empty. No, he was there. He was there, and there are dozens of people in here as well. I began blabbering out. There were people, and there was a woman next to him. I swear it had to be when he was talking about Diana.
And the door slammed shut in mind a minute. They trailed off, looking at the others.
Some held frightened expressions on their faces, but some, like Andrew and Spencer, I saw had confused, disbelieving looks on theirs. I felt a wave of anger flash through me. I'm not crazy. I suddenly began screaming. I'm not fucking crazy. So don't you dare look at me like that. Not after the hell we just went through down below. What? Instantly, I saw reality crash into them. Looks of guilt and shame passed over their faces. I saw Spencer begin to open his mouth, but it was cut off as Wyatt began to scream behind them. You know what?
This. The others turned to see him running for another of the red boxes, which contained a fire hose and axe.
To my shock, he punched straight through the glass with his bare hands, something that should have broken them. But somehow he yanked an axe from it without a glance at his shredded and bleeding hands. His eyes danced wildly around in his sockets, and I instantly recognized that he'd got off the deep end. He began to scream again, both at us and around him in general.
Fuck this man. I've had it with these fuckers dicking us about and try to drive us insane before they kill us. You fuckers want to get it on with me. Well, that's fine, because I'm coming for you.
And with that, he turned and bolted up the stairs for Pepper X.
Wyatt.
Wait.
The captain yelled that he was already out of sight. Come on out, you 20th century shit yells. I heard him scream. The captain turned to us.
Come on. We can't let him get too far away from us. We all began sprinting up the stairs, following the man's voice, as ranted and raved about wiping them all out.
He really has gone over the deep end. He's yelling about killing already dead people with an axe. Pursuing Wyatt, we reached the promenade deck and stopped on the landing.
Wyatt had stopped screaming. The entire ship had gone dead silent. Not just dead silent, a deadly silence that held the worst connotations to it.
Oh, fuck no, I thought.
I saw the same realization reflected in everyone else's face. I swallowed.
Wyatt? I called out, my voice muted, bouncing off the carpet and wood-paneled walls.
There was no answer.
Wyatt, buddy, talk to me, where you at? Andrew yelled out. Still nothing. And then slowly, at first, a new sound began reaching us.
The sound of sobbing and mumbling, please, please, I'm sorry, please, not that, come on, the captain urged us, leading the way down the hall towards the lounge. The doors still stood open, and I could see the balloons and decorations still on the floor. As we drew close, My blood turned to ice as I heard Wyatt begin to scream. Half angry, half terrified. No, no, you're not doing that to me, the captain yelled out. Wyatt, we're coming. He was the first to reach the doorway. The axe suddenly swung around from the right side of the doorway, faster than I thought possible. In that horrible split second, my lips began to yell out a warning. But it was too late. The axe buried itself into the captain's stomach, stopping the older man dead in his tracks. I heard him let out a strangled cry, more of a gasp, as he doubled over. The axe pulled out of him, blood spilling to the floor from the man's wound. A moment later, Wyatt emerged from around the corner, a wild, insane rage glittered on his face. I got you, you fucking ghost, he screamed in the captain's face. I saw him raise the axe again, this time high over his head, as he screamed again. Bleed, you shitter! I saw Vinny and Andrew begin rushing towards him, trying to stop what they saw was coming. But again, I saw it was too late. I closed my eyes and turned quickly away. I didn't want to see the axe slam into the captain's head, the head of the man who'd taken me under his wing and kept me from going broke. I started who'd help pay for my aunt's funeral when she passed away. I couldn't bear to, but I heard it, and it's a sound I'll never be able to forget. A horrified silence settled over the room, and I turned back, feeling like I was about to vomit as I saw the axe buried into his skull. He lay on his back on the floor, a rapidly spreading pool of blood beginning to surround him, staining the carpet. Wide, horrified eyes stared unblinking up at the ceiling, and his mouth was frozen open in shock. The man was very, very dead. I swung my gaze up. Vinny and Andrew had frozen in place, their arms still stretched out, as if to still try and stop the atrocity that had just occurred. Spencer had clapped his hands over his mouth, his face white as a sheet as his body shook uncontrollably. My eyes lifted to the blood-splattered face of the captain's murderer. The look of insane rage and bloodlust lingered in Wyatt's eyes for another moment. Then I saw it die away, saw him snap back to reality. See, Captain, he asked in a whisper, looking down at the corpse. His breathing quickened, and he lifted his own hands to stare at them, as though he were just beginning to comprehend what he'd done. His eyes lifted to us, and I saw the panic begin to reappear in them. I didn't know it was him. He began pleading. I ran into the lounge, and I was completely surrounded by them. They said they were going to kill me, torture me for eternity for thinking about stealing from the purser's office. They called me a coward for crying and breaking down, dared me to attack them. His voice rose to a scream. Then they said their leader was coming in, and I heard the most horrible voice coming from the hallway. I swing for my life, and he cut off, beginning to shake as violently as Spencer was. He looked directly at me. I'm sorry, he said simply. I was famous for her, and she also found that I was going to be sad in a bus. And then he turned and began sprinting for the lounge. Towards the companionway we would take in to get inside. That first night, we remained frozen for a moment and began to chase after him.
Wyatt, wait! And he shouted at him. Wyatt's terrified, hysterical scream flew back at us as he rounded a corner. Fuck you. I'm not staying on board this ship. I'll swim home if I have to.
He slammed into the final corner, and a new, horrific realization hit me. I remembered what I thought about the lifeboats when the Queen Elizabeth had begun moving. We'll be sucked under. Wyatt, don't. I screamed out as we reached the corner. But it was too late. I caught a split-second glimpse of Wyatt fleeing himself over the railing. Then he was gone, out of sight. None of us heard a... We ran to the railing and peered over. For a moment, we saw nothing. Then Wyatt's head broke the water's surface, coughing out water as he began to thrash, attempting to swim away from the ship. Okay, so then he was pulled under. Oh, fuck, Spencer yelled. Then began running for the stern of the ship. Vinny, Andrew, and I right behind him. Part of me prayed that he would miss the propellers, that he'd be spat out the back of the ship. Drowning would be a less painful way to die than this. But as we reached the stern railing, I felt despair, and horror flooded into me. Seeing the dark red stain emerge from beneath the ship spread out with the foam, which drifted behind us in the ship's wake. We stood there for a long time, staring out at the water, as if doing so would return our lost crewmate, our lost friend. We could have been there minutes. We could have been there hours. All I know is the next thing I knew, I was looking up to see the sun beginning to set on the horizon. None of us knew what to do. We were numb and unable to function, so we did the only thing we could do. We went back to our cabin and locked the door, and that's where I am now. Oh, there's only 5 of us left now. The others have, for the life of me, I don't know how, managed to fall asleep. So I can only guess so much mental and physical energy was sapped from them to the point they couldn't stay awake even if they wanted to. Me, I'm too afraid to sleep. Afraid I'll dream of the horrifying things I've seen today, of the figures, of the voice, the eyes staring hungrily down at me from over the hood of the car in the hold, of Wyatt either driven insane or hallucinating, a false image brought on by these ghosts, plunging the axe into the captain's body, and of him disappearing into the water, of him being sliced to pieces by the giant propeller blades. This ship is doing everything it can to drive us insane, have us kill each other, or just flat out take us. It's already taken Will. I know he's lost now. There's no way to bring it back. He's one of them now. Maybe to realize something I said, that there was only 5 of us left. But in reality, there's only 4. For how much longer, though? I don't know. The compass I had in my supplies spins around nonstop. I can't even tell which direction we're heading in, and I don't know how to position our location by the stars. The only person who knew how to do that was the captain, and he's dead. All I know is this: I'm not just going to roll over and let the ship take me. I'm going to fight to try and find a way off, to help get myself and the others back home, or die trying. Well, might have wanted to stay in the 1950s forever, but I want to go back to the peace and normality of 2023. Compared to this, how the relative peace and normality, anyways. I don't know, though. Do any of you guys have any ideas? Any ideas at all what to do now? Even if it's the dumbest idea in the world, we'll take it. Anything's better than just letting the hopelessness overwhelm me. Just please give us any direction to take that might help us get off this damned ship. Please. The music is starting again. I hear it filtering through the walls. A different tune now, but again, one I recognize. That's not the worst part, though. Someone began softly knocking a few minutes ago on the cabin door, and then began calling in, asking for us to come and join the party. The voice that asked it was Will's. And then another voice joined him, a woman's voice, one that asked the same question with a British accent. And finally, a third voice, one that made me want to break down in tears. The captain's voice. The implications pierced my heart and soul like a dagger. To Will, this ship is heaven. A place where he can eternally spend frozen in the time period he wanted to go back to. And to me, it's hell. I don't feel like